Gentlemen, my name is Vipin Rakshi. Welcome to this seminar, A Call for Board Level Climate Action in Cambridge and Peterborough. As we strive towards net zero, there are many challenges, and hopefully the work of climate action will give us some ideas and a better understanding of the issues and give local businesses what we need to do and what we need to deliver. We have some esteemed panel and guests to give us an oversight. And with that, I wanted to hand over to Emily Fernworth, who's the Director of Climate Action in Cambridge. I hand over to you to introduce the esteemed panel. Emily, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vip, and welcome everybody to this exciting session that we have today. As most of you will know, the report from the Independent Commission on Climate has been released last week for the area in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and we'll be focusing on some of the outcomes of that report, and in particular, the role that business can play in helping to understand, support, and deliver some of the actions that's some of the actions that are needed. My role as co-director of the Centre for Climate Engagement at the University of Cambridge is very focused on thinking about how do we engage, in particular, chairs and non-executive directors, but also broadly the boards of companies in the local area. And importantly, how do we connect these organisations with local authorities, with the university more broadly? And so it's particularly exciting to have this conversation today, almost as a kickoff for an ongoing conversation that we want to have with many of you about where do we want to focus on priorities, where can we support the Institute of Directors locally throughout the university networks and beyond, to really make sure that we're giving the best support we can to local businesses, to local communities to address some of these challenges. We're extremely privileged today to have Baroness Brown of Cambridge, who's the chair of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Independent Commission on Climate, to present the key findings from the latest report. And so I will not wait any longer and will hand over to Baroness Brown so that she can start her slide deck. And we look forward to hearing some of the key outcomes. I'll then go on to introduce the rest of the panelists once we've heard from Julia. Many thanks, Julia. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily, and good morning, everybody. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen. As we know, that's always a slightly anxious moment in these events. Oh, it seems to be working. Oops, can I get that to? It seems to have worked. Brilliant. So well, good morning again, and it's been a real pleasure to chair the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Independent Climate Commission for the past year and a bit, with great support from the commissioners, 3 of whom you're going to be meeting shortly. So I just want to go through why, remind us why in our region this is so important, and then say a little bit about our recommendations and some of the things we've said about business. And of course, our recommendations are to the combined authority, but business has a hugely important role in helping make this change happen. So first of all, this terrible picture reminds us about what happened in Germany, and indeed Germany and Belgium and other parts of Central Europe earlier this year. This appalling flooding where over 200 people died. This is something that could happen here. Had that weather system taken a slightly different path, this could have happened, this torrential rain could have happened over the UK. So we have to reduce our emissions so that the probability of this happening doesn't go on increasing rapidly. But we also have to prepare to make sure that when these really extreme events, which no flood barriers and drainage systems are going to be able to eliminate, when these really extreme events do happen, we also have the right emergency systems in place, and people and businesses have the right information to make sure they are safe, and indeed that as far as possible their businesses can be safe even in these periods of catastrophic events. We have high emissions in our combined authority region. They're significantly above the UK average, about 25% above if we exclude peat emissions. Now, peat emissions we don't understand fully, but with the latest estimates, our emissions are something like 70% above the average if you include the peat. But we have high emissions locally, and they're falling more slowly than the UK average. So we really do need to take action, and to take action fast. We're also a region that is particularly at risk from climate change. First of all, the maximum temperatures that we experience down in this southeast part of the UK are rising faster than for the rest of the country. So right in the south of our region, these temperatures are rising at 0.6 to 0.7 degrees per annum. And of course, we saw almost 40 degrees centigrade in the Botanic Gardens in Cambridge in 2019. So we will be facing some very high maximum temperatures, and we already have that risk with us. We are also a water stressed area with, as you know, a lot of planned development. So we also really need to be thinking about how do we reduce our water consumption, both in our businesses and in our homes, and particularly in our new homes. How do we reduce leakage? What sort of water storage are we going to need in order to be resilient to that change? Germany is already seeing something like 80% of its common trees being affected by the drought, the heat, the wetter winters, the extreme rainfall, and new pests and diseases associated with climate change. Germany are recognizing they have a crisis in their woodlands and forests. We are beginning to see that in the UK as well. And we need to recognize that actually the kind of things we grow will need to change. And so one of the things, very sadly, is that we're in an area where as we get towards 2050, we're unlikely to be a good area for growing beech. And so, you know, we should be thinking about this both in terms of our nature restoration and our gardens. But of course, for some people, it may also affect their businesses. We're also a region that sees all kinds of flooding. Right up in the north of the region, we see some impacts of sea level rise and coastal flooding. And in the rest of the region, we see river flooding and surface water flooding. And some work that Cambridge University have done for us suggests that by 2100, a huge proportion of properties and industrial and business facilities will be potentially exposed to river flooding. But we're also going to see potentially significantly higher winter rainfall, and that will lead both to river flooding, but also to much more incidents of surface water flooding around the region. And again, our homes and our businesses need to be prepared for that. So it's really crucial that we both reduce emissions and we prepare for the impacts that are still to come, even as we reduce emissions, because temperatures are going to go on going up until 2050. And globally, we've had the data recently that we've used 85% of the emissions we can emit until 2050 if we're going to be still able to be on track for 1.5 degrees. And we have a very, very similar position locally, which is that if we go on emitting CO2 and other greenhouse gases at the rate we are today, we will have about 6, perhaps at maximum 8 years left before we've used up, if you like, all of the allowance of emissions we might give ourselves if we're going to be making our proper contribution to the UK and the world reaching net zero. So we've got to move from that top green line and that green dotted line, our kind of business as usual line in terms of emissions. We've got to get from that line down to this purple line, this purple dotted line, which is taking us down to where we need to be for our science-based target level of emissions, the kind of level of emissions we can have if we're going to make our contribution locally to achieving net zero. So we really do need urgent action everywhere in the UK and the globe, but actually particularly in our region. So that feels really high pressure, and it potentially feels like a really negative and a really worrying message. But I think the things we can do to address climate change and to make ourselves more resilient can actually also be really positive and can contribute to quality of life for the residents of the region. So one of the key things, both for reducing temperatures in our cities, but also for absorbing water and making us more resilient to flooding, is about having more green space. Who doesn't want more green space? We need to make our homes resilient to flooding, resilient to high temperatures, but also better insulated and cheaper to heat. That means healthier and better homes for people. Taking cars off the road, stopping burning rubbish without capturing the fumes will give us cleaner air. There will be a huge growth of green jobs if we line ourselves up for those opportunities and make sure our job strategy in the region is about all jobs being green jobs. There's real opportunity for business growth and really high quality jobs, inspiring jobs for people in the region. There's an opportunity for us to grow this green economy, particularly with the incredible assets we have, like our universities and our colleges. Improving public transport. Well, you know, most people in the region would give 3 cheers for that. And all of this contributes to improved health and well-being and lower costs for our health services, and of course less absenteeism for building. So if we do the right things to make these changes, we can really deliver, I think, a very bright future for the region. It can be a very positive transition. It won't be without its challenges, but it can have a very positive outcome. So in our first report back in March, the first part of our report, we looked at transport, buildings, energy and peat and a number of cross-cutting issues, and we made more than 30 recommendations, and the CPCA has voted to accept all of them. So we're absolutely delighted about that. And in terms of the cross-cutting ones, one of the key ones was a climate working group, which involves not only the CPCA and the councils, but also the key players like our hospitals, like UK power networks, like the Environment Agency, like the representatives of business groups, all of the really key players who need to be working together to make change happen in a coordinated and integrated way. They've committed and started the development of an implementation action plan. They've decided to look again at the local transport plan with a real emphasis on improving connectivity for everybody in the region, so a much broader range of people being able to get to key places for jobs. And they've also provided funding to really start to look at this issue of peat in the region. So we've now made some further recommendations on business, on how do we ensure this is a just transition, and on adaptation, nature and water, and also on how we deal with our waste in the region. So the CPCA will now move forward and consider how they respond to those recommendations. So I think it's clear that we all want and can have a region to be proud of that really shows leadership in addressing the climate issues. And also in doing that, we can make our region an even greater place to live. And in a very extensive period of consultation we undertook over the summer with residents and residents groups in the region, it was very, very keen that the region's residents are very keen to play their part. They want to see leadership in the region. They want more and better information about the actions they can take. They want the community to be strongly engaged and recognize that we have, of course, different types of communities, different local circumstances all around the region, but they recognize that everybody has a role to play here. And it's not just something we should look at government and local government to deliver for us, that it's something everybody must be part of. So just let me touch on the what we said about business and industry. So perhaps not unexpectedly, given that we don't really have much in the way of heavy industry in the region, our industrial and commercial emissions are slightly below average for the UK. We have some assets in the region, like we have a strong innovation base with lots of early stage companies, but we don't really have any environmental technology kind of focus or hub. And we think that's something that as we think of the future economic strategy for region, that should be thought about more. We really do think that being active in parts of the green economy, having a green economy, is going to be essential for business growth and inward investment into the region, regionally in the UK, of course, and globally. But we would like to see our region benefiting from the sort of inward investment that having, I think, a stronger green economy would give us. There is an enormous potential for the region to be a leader. We have real strengths in areas like sensing and IT and advanced manufacturing and agriculture, which can all contribute hugely to the green economy. So I think we need to be thinking about how do we really exploit those capabilities and that potential to really develop a strong green economy locally. We've got obviously big businesses who need to be decarbonising their supply chains. We think we need to develop better connections between businesses so that they can learn from each other. We need a real focus on green skills, the skills that will get us to net zero. We need a focus on how do we use this green growth to reduce the inequality across the region and make sure that green growth contributes to a just transition. And we got a very strong message that it's, whilst big companies can commit to science-based targets and get consultants in to help them understand what that means and how they decarbonize their supply chains and even how you do the calculations, because that's all quite complicated, we got a really strong message that SMEs need more coordinated help, more advice, more kind of, a one-stop shop, one place to go to bring together the help that organizations like the CBI and the Chambers of Commerce and others, the help that they have and they can bring together, but helping SMEs to access that and make sure it's comprehensive in helping them go down this route of benefiting from the green economy, but also decarbonizing their operations. So our recommendations for business was that we wanted the CPCA to really support the development of a bold vision for the economic future of the region that grows the green economy and meets our climate goals, but that we needed some really bold visioning for 2030 and for 2050 as to how do we get the best out of the green economy. That the new regional skills strategy shouldn't have green jobs as an add-on. We should look through the lens of saying every job will be a green job, because whatever company you're working in, it'll be a zero carbon company. So all of these new jobs, people have to understand how they can support their company in getting to be a net zero company, in reducing its emissions and being resilient for the future. We wanted the CPCA to play a role in convening and supporting and helping to fund advice services for small and medium-sized businesses. And we suggested that there are a number of initiatives for businesses to sign up across the region to schemes about reducing their emissions. We suggested that maybe a regional one, a mayor's low carbon business charter or something right across the region might be helpful in encouraging local organisations and businesses to sign up to pathways to net zero. So clearly businesses have a huge role to play, both in reducing their emissions and becoming more resilient, in thinking about how they may need to change their activities or their products to be part of the green economy for the future, in supporting their employees, for example, in helping them get to work in greener ways, but also it will help businesses in attracting new employees, because so many of our young people are now wanting to do really tough due diligence on the companies they work for to really understand that they're working for businesses that are committed to being part of the transition to net zero. So thank you very much for listening, and I shall be joining the panel and look forward to hearing your interests, your concerns and your questions.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was a really useful run through, and as you say, a sort of combination of some quite pressing messages, particularly around the timeline that we have, but also sort of super interesting to think of our local area having lots of assets for us to build on in terms of the minds and the innovation and the local communities that we have to focus on addressing these challenges. So I'm sure we'll have a...
Yes, I was going to say, one of the things that in my experience, many businesses don't realize, particularly small and medium businesses, how welcome they will be if they knock on the doors of our universities and our colleges and say, can you help us? You know, I think sometimes, I mean, I've run a university, so I understand. I think sometimes we appear much too frightening, and people think, well, I don't know who to approach or how to get in. And universities and colleges are there thinking, how can we engage better with business? So it's really a big cry. We've got all of this actually resource and support. So come and hammer on a door if you want some help, and you'll actually find that people are really keen in our various institutions for training and research. People are really keen to engage.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right there, and we're certainly looking forward to taking this all forward with whoever wants to knock on our door. I'm going to now ask our esteemed panelists to switch on their videos as I introduce everybody. We really do have an incredible lineup, and you're going to be hearing sort of from the horse's mouth, so to speak, in terms of those who've been involved in the Commission report. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Dame Polly Curtis, who is the founder of the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, as well as holding many different roles on boards across the country. So it'll be incredible to get her views on how, in particular, business can respond to this. I'd also like to introduce Lynn Sullivan, who's an architect and a member of the CLC Green Construction Board, and has been, obviously, as you might imagine, given her experience in this area, critical for the conversation around how the region is going to tackle some of both the existing buildings, but also the new developments that are going to be put forward. And we're also delighted to have Adrian Galt, who's been instrumental in being able to feed into the Commission report, particularly given his experience working with the government as an economist, and also as part of his role with the Climate Change Committee as chief economist there. So really interesting insights in terms of what this means for the region at both a macro and a micro level in terms of how things will evolve. So wonderful to have you all here. Before I sort of start asking initial questions to get the conversation going, I would just like to turn to each of you and just get your, just to kind of give you an introduction to the role that you've had in the Commission so far and some of the things that you're hoping to get out of this conversation. So maybe Polly, if I could turn to you first.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, delighted to be here and delighted to have been part of the Commission. As Emily said, I've spent the last 30 years working with the corporate sector on helping them to understand the big challenges of sustainability, which we see here in a microcosm, if you like, here in East Anglia. What's been really interesting to me is over the years how we've recognized the huge importance of SMEs in this debate. I've spent the vast majority of my career working with big companies, partly because the smaller companies are time poor. They find it really difficult to find the time to be able to invest. And so, as Julia says, I think we need to find ways of helping them to get right to the nub of the materiality of the issue to them. What is at risk to them and where are the opportunities? Just before I stood down from the Institute, we've set up now an accelerator here in Cambridge precisely to do that, to try and help SMEs, but also to help them tap into this amazing ecosystem that you have here in Cambridge and other parts of the region as well. Amazing resources that are available, not just from the academic community, but from one another, this idea of opportunity and co-creation. But that needs enabling, it needs facilitating. And I think the report made that really clear. You can't just expect it to happen. We have to facilitate it.
Thank you, Polly. And Lynn, maybe to you next.
Thank you, and thank you, Emily, for the introduction. Yes, I am an architect, and I'm an architect who's also done quite a lot of work on research, particularly applied research on buildings and built environment. So the sustainability of the built environment has been a running theme in my work. I also sit on the Cambridge Quality. I'm a deputy chair of the Cambridge Quality Panel, and we see the major developments on behalf of the county council and a lot of the local authorities. And we've actually we defer our remarks in terms of the design quality and so on to the Cambridge Quality Charter, which is something like almost 15 years old now, but it's the 4 C's. So since 2010, when we were set up, we've been looking not only at design quality, but also the impacts on community, and particularly one of our headings, we've got 4 C's. One of our headings has been climate. So over the years, we've been very clear about, it is about how built environment projects contribute impact on emissions and overall sustainability in the built environment. So our recommendations were specifically about buildings targets, both for new buildings and existing buildings, but also about the context for buildings. So how the overall impact of development and building projects is also very crucially impacted by their location and therefore their connectivity, the kind of transportation that's available, and also the local energy system. So it's really about context as much as it is about specific buildings. So yeah, I look forward very much to our discussions about how businesses can help in terms of these objectives.
Thank you, Lynn. And I think that point around the kind of interconnectivity between, it's not just about the actual physical buildings, it's everything else going around it that's going to be a critical part of that piece. And Adrian, finally to you, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself a little bit further and talking about your role in the report.
Yeah, no, thank you, Emily. So I'm an economist. I worked for over 10 years with the National Committee on Climate Change as chief economist. And then since stepping back from that, I've been working independently, and I was working as an advisor to the Independent Commission. Contributed to drafting quite a substantial amount of the final report. I guess in terms of one of the things I'd like to just draw the links to is the just transition and the role of business there, because that's a major theme of the Commission's report. And as Julia said, we spoke to a lot of people throughout the region about the needs of the just transition. And there was a great willingness of people in the area to act and desire to act. They saw that need across the board for everybody. But a part of that, they certainly saw the need for business to be at the fore in taking action, that there was more to do in setting emission reduction targets and being held to account towards those targets, but also more to do in terms of thinking about the needs of the just transition in terms of training requirements going forward, and how those could be met, and thinking about how you can help employees dealing with travel needs, for example, and moving towards use of public transport, moving towards electric vehicles and so on. So a lot the business can do, both for themselves, both for yourselves in terms of taking actions to reduce emissions, but also in working with others across the board. And that was a key kind of demand coming through the consultations that we had prior to the report.
Thanks very much for that, Adrian. I think this idea of sort of, I mean, essentially, I guess a lot of employees are actually also part of the community. So it's a critical, group to be able to reach. So just to open up the conversation a little bit more, I mean, as Julia sort of painted the whole picture, there was obviously sort of, as I mentioned earlier, quite a tight time frame that we're looking at, but potentially an awful lot of opportunity for us to really kind of, to sort of take up that challenge, if you like. So Polly, maybe a question for you initially. Where do you see sort of some of the opportunities for businesses to sort of really play a key role in this transition?
Well, I think there are, the wonderful thing about it, and the report made it very clear, and Julia just highlighted now, there's an incredible spectrum of opportunity there, from green jobs through to greater skills, for example, and this is an area of Lynn's expertise, but I'm very involved at the moment, for example, in a major retrofit of an office building. And the opportunities for there to create a building which is reaches all the highest environmental standards and will save hundreds of tens of thousands of carbon over its over 100-year lifespan are immense. But the challenge is there aren't the skills and there aren't the materials readily available here in the region, and sometimes even in the UK. So I think there are opportunities for building that resource. Of course, there are ways in which we can, every organization can reduce its footprint, but also, of course, tapping into these amazing opportunities for providing the services and facilities in the real tech sector, green tech, clean tech, amazing opportunities around fast chargers, innovation for the way in which we might be able to capture CO2, the real sort of at the cutting edge right through to the basic skills. So there's an opportunity for every business in this region if they can sometimes even rethink their business model to tap into that.
No, and I think that sort of rethinking of business models, I think, is going to be at the heart of sort of being able to accelerate things and sort of getting that kind of creativity around addressing what might the future look like in 5, 10, 15 years. Maybe, Adrian, to come to you next, we've obviously seen that transport in all its different forms in the region is quite a critical aspect of both reducing emissions, but also supporting the broader kind of sustainability of the area. What would you say are some of the key things that businesses need to start thinking about, and maybe what does their interaction with local authorities and government need to look like?
Yeah, I mean, there are things to be thinking about in terms of the transition towards electric vehicles, electric cars and vans. So there may be opportunities to be thinking about your vehicle fleets and transitioning those to electric. But of course, there's a charging network requirement that is needed. There is more money available for that now from the central government. So there's a need for the combined authority to be engaging and the local authority to be engaging on that in terms of developing that network. More generally, the public transport within the area is weak in some areas. So engagement on improving public transport, moving towards greater use of buses for employees, thinking about how what the locations and how that can be linked into the public transport and improve public transport network it will be a key going forward. We need to move towards electric vehicles, but also think about how we can shift away from fossil fuels and towards greater use of public transport, particularly where that can be again shifted towards zero carbon vehicles.
Thank you. I mean, it seems like a few practical things to focus on initially as well. It's really helpful. And Lynn, maybe a sort of a similar question for you. What should businesses already be starting to think about in terms of both existing build and thinking about new buildings?
Well, I think we've been very clear about our recommendations that all new buildings should be net zero ready, appropriately constructed and anticipated to have appropriate reduced running energy from 2023. And we've said this particularly in the context of the growth agenda for the region. So it's an understanding of those targets is key. And I think one thing we've been very clear about is that certainly in the context of existing buildings, that we have to go further than just this sort of badge of EPCC and so on, which everybody gets when they rent a building or buy a building. We really do need to understand where the energy is used in our buildings, and that we should be able to set targets which are appropriate for, we'll call it the race to zero, but a science-based targets. So be very, very specific about the energy and therefore the carbon that is likely to be the burden from those buildings. But I think the really important message is to have a plan. And so to have a plan for improvement and better than business as usual, which clearly we, the urgency demands. You have to know where you are at the moment, and a lot of people don't really have that understanding. And I think one of the questions in the Q&A was about engaging with the younger generation of workers, people who are employed in local businesses. And I think having that plan will really encourage them, because and it could be, and we're hoping it will be aligned to the sort of race to zero protocols for disclosure. But if you have a plan, you have to have a benchmark of where you are, and you have to have really, specific targets for emissions in relation to both new and existing buildings. And of course, the scope 1 and 2, I'm sure Polly's far ahead of me in this, and I'm sure Julia too, but it goes beyond just thinking about your emissions impacts as a business. In the context of the built environment, it also means if you are impacting consumers by your products, or in the case of developers, actually, buildings that you sell, then it is beholden to you to actually understand the impacts of those, both at the point of sale and also in use. So it requires quite a bit of understanding, but that should all be part of the plan, really. And you can't do it overnight, and you certainly can't do it if you don't know where you're starting from. So I think that would really be a good start.
Sure. Polly, you wanted to come in.
And just to add on to that, I mean, there's an amazing amount of help out there already. It's not as though this is you're out there on your own. I mean, I am an advisor to the British Standards Institute, and I was with them yesterday, and it's extraordinary the number of tools and resources that are available to people to help them measure in order to manage and set track their progress against well-established targets and principles. So I think this isn't an empty space here. In fact, if anything, the biggest challenge is choosing who to work with to make sure that you don't get distracted or taken in the wrong direction.
And I think part of it is making sure that there's visibility of those resources when people are so busy just with their day-to-day jobs that they perhaps don't know where to turn. So that's maybe something to take forward, is just to kind of create some visibility.
Yeah.
Julia.
That's one of the recommendations of the
And I think for small and medium companies, it's about the simplicity of use of those resources as well. I mean, if any company goes onto the Science Based Targets website and tries to follow it through, I think you can be very, very quickly put off and think, oh my God, how on earth could we do this? I think it's about there being real help for small and medium businesses about the steps, the small steps initially that they can take, the first steps they can take that could actually save them money. Because certainly we should all start with efficiency, and using less. Resource efficiency, energy efficiency is the first step down this path, and that always saves you money. So I think it's making it accessible for people, I think, which is the point I think Polly and Lynn were making, really, is so crucial.
Yeah, that does seem like a kind of an action that we can think about taking away. There's a couple of questions that have come through. I'm going to turn to those. And then I have a couple of my own, actually, just following on from this conversation. But please do kind of continue to add your questions into the Q&A for the panelists as we go through. Lynn, you already kind of picked up on this, but this point around, in terms of some of the young talent coming through from schools and colleges and universities, how do we connect and kind of create interesting jobs and opportunities for younger people? What should businesses be doing to kind of create these opportunities, or again make these opportunities more visible to this young talent coming through? I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add just before I turn to the others on that one.
Well, I think Polly talked about actually thinking about a business activity, new kinds of business activities, and that's something which would be tremendously attractive, wouldn't it, to the younger generation. But I just think the transition is amazingly exciting, because a lot of people at school, I also am an examiner and tutor and so on. And you know, the young are absolutely desperate to make their contribution, but I think, you know, they sort of come up against business as usual, and the real key to it is to engage them with the transition, because their energy and their understanding actually it can be a real asset to the business. So the key thing is to try and harness that energy and understanding and commitment indeed in the transition. And so, yeah, it comes back to what Julia says, have you know, what I said, have a clear plan, but yeah, make it really accessible and clear, and engage those young workers in it.
Polly.
I think the wonderful thing about young people is that they're also extremely good at spotting greenwash. And so the really important thing is to be authentic in what if you're offering an amazing set of opportunities, and many companies, I think, do have incredible opportunities to offer, but you need to project your purpose, if you like. And I know the world is a bit of a wash with all the purpose talk, but nevertheless, if your company has the ability, or if its business proposition is offering a solution in this space, then being able to tell that story clearly and well is what young people are looking for. It's quite hard sometimes to recognize when some of these companies just how committed they are to this agenda. And so being clear about it, I think, is people are becoming increasingly conscious of what they're looking for now.
Absolutely. And Adrian, maybe just to you on this point, I mean, on a very practical level, what kind of jobs are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, as Julia said early on, it's actually about jobs across the whole spectrum of what business is doing. It's across the whole economy. I mean, yes, we can identify certain opportunities where we can look at these things and think about green jobs in, you know, electric vehicle mechanics, for example, or looking at the need to improve the energy efficiency of our building stock, or heat pump installation, those kinds of trades that are going to be needed. But it goes much wider across the whole of the economy, about thinking about the use of ICT, thinking about STEM skills and digital skills. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities there across the board, not just you know, specific trades that you can think of that we're going to need because they're low carbon, but all jobs are going to need to move towards these kinds of requirements. And we have particular skills in the area where we are leaders in IT, leaders in digital, and so on. So there's plenty of opportunities there, plenty of exciting opportunities going forward.
Yeah, I like this idea of a sort of, you know, eco tech, or just, you know, eco cluster, really, in the context of how we can evolve some of our incredible, you know, sort of IT expertise into this area. Julie, before I move on to the next question, did you have anything to add on this sort of idea of engaging young people in this agenda?
Well, I certainly think that you know, making a commitment to the agenda as a company is a first step in engaging, you know, engaging good new young employees, because that's what so many of them want. And I think Lynn and Polly were suggesting that actually these are the young, you know, these young people may well be the people you can give the challenge of taking the first steps in reducing emissions and becoming more resilient too, as long as you're prepared to listen to them, but giving them the responsibility to actually come into a company and start helping to change the thinking. And I think it is about changing how we think. It's about thinking, well, we've always done it this way, but actually, could we do it in a different way that uses less resources, uses lower carbon or zero carbon materials? Could we use wood instead of steel in this piece of construction? You know, it's thinking, not, you know, challenging the way we currently think about how it is we do things, and say, is there a different way? And sometimes we will find those ways are much cheaper. And also looking at where digitalization, and of course, bringing in young people to do that is always a good idea in my view. Looking at where digitalization can change the way we do things and the way we think, and how efficient and effective we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question that's come through that's quite pertinent in terms of some of the work that we're involved in too is the role of the boards, you know, of many of the businesses, and also some of the broader kind of ecosystem of organizations that exist in the area. You know, what do boards need to understand? How do we kind of get boards to be more forward thinking, to be more nimble, to take more risk perhaps in terms of some of the leadership decisions when they're thinking about new business models? What are some of your thoughts for how we can really kind of support boards in the region to sort of understand and take a leadership position in this area? I don't know who wants to come in first on that one. Maybe Polly.
That was for Polly, that one.
Well, I think the good thing is that things have improved enormously over the past few years. It wasn't all that long ago where you could sit on the board and you could find that environment and sustainability had been relegated to a subcommittee which periodically came up on the agenda. But there is a very, very long way to go for this to be a mainstream topic on the agenda. One of the ways in which it's coming up now, of course, is because it's so deeply connected to risk, and which is what boards obsess about. But I'm very conscious, even so, as to how many boards still focus their primary focal point is effectively money, and they're not. It's still hard, I think, for them to make that to close the connection between climate change and the board agenda. But it's improving. And sometimes the driver is coming from not from the board top down, but from the executive up. You know, as companies see risks materializing in their everyday lives, they're putting it on the agenda and asking the board for permission to invest. So, but you can't, unless the board really gets in behind this, we're not going to be able to make progress fast enough, because there will be a need for changing business models, changing investment plans, rethinking strategy. I sit on the board of Anglian Water, and climate change is right up there. Not at all surprisingly, it has a huge core material impact on their business. So there's no need to push that board into talking about it. The question is just how fast can we do it?
And anyone else want to comment on that role of boards? Julia.
I'm just absolutely agree with everything Polly said, but also recognizing that the quite a lot of boards are quite elderly, and there is really still a very important role, I think, for educating boards, for helping board members really think about what the implications of the changing climate and emissions reductions are for the companies that they are advising and being critical friends to. Because it's, as we've heard, it's terribly tempting, as Lynn said, to keep focused on the financial results. Actually, you know, boards sometimes I think need to be made to look at the long-term future. It's one of the things they should be doing. Look at the long-term future of the company, not just its short-term future. And when you start to look at the long-term future, you have to be thinking about reducing emissions and resilience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and sure, Lynn, sorry.
No, I just wanted to give a plug to one of my children, actually, who's just written a report on the top 500, the Fortune 500, who are the top 500 companies globally. And I think it's now over, I thought something like 38% of them have commitments to go net zero by 2030. And if they are adopting, which they are obliged to do really, the UN protocols on the race to zero, then that means that they are looking to their supply chains as well when they get into this scope 3 emissions. So there's going to be a cascading effect. You know, these aren't just empty promises. You know, they put it on the line. It's up there for all to see. So I think, you know, any business that has a medium term, let alone long-term business plan, you know, has to take into account the fact that others will be demanding of them, and the very least that they have to do is have the plan, you know, and have a realistic plan.
And things like the task force for climate-related financial disclosure have made an incredible difference in that suddenly now people are obliged increasingly obligated to report on the climate risk that they represent to investors. Sorry, Julie, I didn't mention.
No, that's fine, Polly. I was just going to say I chair the Carbon Trust, and we have an office, a small but growing office in Beijing. And of course, we do a lot of work helping companies, and I'm not trying to advertise at all here, but helping companies, and usually big companies, to understand how to reduce their carbon footprint or carbon footprinting their products. But the interesting thing we're seeing in the Beijing office is more and more business from Chinese supply chain companies who are seeing exactly the demand Lynn is talking about, that the companies, you know, elsewhere in the world who they supply into are now saying to them, well, you've got to be able to tell us what the carbon footprint of the components you supply us is, because we need that for our reporting. And so we're seeing our business in China grow very rapidly as more and more Chinese suppliers are having to go through these processes. So this is really happening globally, and it's, you know, it's not an issue that if you do that in the UK, you're going to be undercut by stuff coming in from abroad, because people are having to make their global supply chains do this as well. So it really can be an opportunity rather than a disadvantage.
Yeah. Adrian, any thoughts from you on boards?
No, really, to agree with everything that's just been said, but I think there's an issue around the smaller companies. Yes, larger companies are taking actions and signing up to targets, but I think there's a recent British Chamber of Commerce survey that suggested that a growing number of small companies, and half of their respondents were perceiving that there was a problem that was recognised by their customers. So that was something that was giving them pause for thought. But there was still a long way to go. Not all were thinking that way. And even though half of them saw that issue from their customers, there's only 10% of them were actually measuring their carbon footprint. So there is still a long way to go in terms of getting smaller companies on board and understanding the issues. So I think there's a real kind of education issue around and about making available those tools that do exist. You're right, there's a lot of tools out there, but making them easily available and known about is still a key issue.
Yeah. I'm going to try and squeeze in one final question before I wrap up. And obviously we're slowly starting to sort of think about what life looks like, sort of, you know, dealing with a pandemic and dealing with getting back to work. And obviously it has disrupted businesses hugely. And this is not, you know, a lot of businesses are kind of seeing, you know, this recovery alongside the need to kind of be very bold and ambitious on climate. There's a lot that businesses are dealing with at the moment. What is the role that local government, national government should and needs to play in making sure that there's more support for business? And obviously that brings in the role of you know, we've talked about it already, but you know, the role of the universities and colleges in the area as well. It would be great to get a perspective on, you know, what is, well, I mean, you've talked a little bit about some of the offerings, but what more do we need to do in this region to sort of really support the transition here? Maybe Julia, if I could turn to you first.
Well, the government's net zero strategy, which I have to, you know, one has to say is a world leading strategy. We are the first country to have a strategy of how we get to net zero that covers, you know, that goes right across all of our sectors. It isn't yet perfect, but it is a brilliant start. It has quite a lot of good words. It has also 1.5 billion of public money for innovation. It talks about business investment quite a lot. It talks about the banks being more supportive, particularly of business investment. That's about trying to transform businesses to make these you know, to be part of the transition. So hopefully there will be pressure on banks to be looking at what people need loans and investment for, and being more sympathetic to investments that that are about being part of this transition. There's quite a lot of talk about, you know, national government joining up better with local government and recognizing that at least 30% of the emissions reductions we need are things that local government actually controls and has the power to make happen. There's a new forum to be set up between the Department for Business, Energy and Innovation Strategy, BEIS, with local voices, called the Local Net Zero Forum, where central government is going to be listening to local voices. What's for me is depressingly missing is actually more provision of funding to local areas, because so much of support to small and medium businesses is better done locally than trying to do it nationally, because locally there's much more understanding of what those businesses need. But there's I think the intent is there. The intent and the recognition that local support is necessary is there. We desperately need to see it delivered at a local level. And one of the things we've been trying to persuade, that as part of the Commission, trying to persuade the Combined Authority to do, is to use its borrowing powers to set up, perhaps to go out and have a local bond to support the green transition, so that the local authority can be a key player in funding locally for green transition activities. And we think that's something they should be thinking about. And one of our commissioners, Russell Pico, is talking to them about ways they might go about that, because I think we do need more local support, not just the things the national government is announcing.
Well, that sounds like a fabulous development, and I think exactly the sort of new thing, I guess, that we need to have on the table. And Adrian, as an economist, I guess you can expect that I might want to seek your view on this in terms of, how are we going to fund the transition?
Well, as Julia said, we are encouraging the Combined Authority to look at its borrowing powers, but more generally, there are going to be there's issues for national government about how this is funded, and the use of carbon taxation, for example, the recycling of revenues from those sources back into actions. But there's going to be a combination of sources. I mean, some of this is going to be public finance, but some of this is going to be costs to individuals and households. But we need to find routes to subsidise some of those changes that are needed. But also, a lot of these things do pay for themselves. I mean, we need to regard these as investments that have a worthwhile return. And again, I think partly this comes back to this need to make. Well, ideally, we want a kind of one-stop shop for business about where they can go for information and help. That will be extremely difficult to achieve given the resources that are out there. But I think there is a role for the Combined Authority in looking at how it can pull together some of those resources and improve access to that information, and improve access to information on the kinds of actions that can be taken, the simple things to do first that actually have a short and quick payback period, especially when businesses have other concerns at the moment, very substantial other concerns. So there are still things, though, that we can do that will pay for themselves. So it isn't just an upfront cost. There are also investments to be made that will have, some of them, quite short-term returns.
Thank you, Adrian. Lynn or Polly?
Well, I would just build on that and say that there's a lot of money out there for the right opportunity properly presented, but really small companies in particular, they need certainty. They actually need certainty and clarity and simplicity. And I think we need to focus more on trying to get some smaller steps taken now, rather than trying to get, rather than perfection being the enemy of the good. Let's just get some initiatives going. This is why these green bonds, I think, are so important. Get something going that people can focus on and get started with.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lynn?
Yes, just briefly, I support my colleagues' comments, but there's a remarkable similarity also with the work that we've been doing with the Just Transition, where local people, want to be engaged but don't feel they have the money to be engaged, and feel somewhat, set back by COVID, etc. But what they really want is clarity on advice and guidance, and so that they feel they can play their part. And I think that's a general need, and I think hopefully we've pointed towards that from many different aspects.
Oh, absolutely. But It's been an incredible insight from all of you, and I think given us an awful lot to talk about. One of the reasons for wanting to run this session with the Institute of Directors in the East of England was to sort of see where there could be opportunities for us at the Centre for Climate Engagement at Hughes Hall at the university, working across the university with lots of other colleagues who are very focused on this, and in a practical way. You've given us lots of ideas for kind of what we need next, but what we can potentially do next. Ideas around needing to make resources more accessible, more visible to businesses, and need to think about maybe the difference between what some of the bigger industry players in the area might be already doing, and build on that with regards to their supply chain, and looking separately at some of the smaller businesses in terms of what they need, which might be a slightly different resource requirement. But also this point around innovation and, what does the future of the area look like, that we can really build on the kind of the strengths of the region. So I think there are quite a lot of different points that we'll take away here. And I hope that we can come back to this group and just to get your advice and ideas on how we can kind of, take those forward, and who in particular with regards to which authorities in the area we should be engaging with on helping to support that. So I just want to thank all of you so much for your time today. I know you're incredibly busy people. We're looking forward to sharing this information more broadly across our networks. And we will be kind of thinking about next steps. This is very much a kind of kick-off conversation for us. And so looking forward to a plan of action over the coming months and years. So thank you all so much. Thank you so much to the IoD for hosting us, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh. Thank you, everybody.